Keep President Meade in our prayers, who is still recovering from a car accident that he was in, which is why the other institute class is on hold until he's well enough to be back teaching. 2 Nephi chapter 25, verses 1 through 8, Nephi introduces why he's using Isaiah. And these verses explain why I studied Hebrew. And so we're going to look at those as we begin our study of Isaiah. Behold, now I, Nephi, do speak somewhat concerning the words which I have written, which have been spoken by the mouth of Isaiah. For behold, Isaiah spake many things which were hard for my people to understand. Does that resonate? I have a friend who I was the ward missionary when Walter Phelps was baptized back in the Lorraine ward in, it was Lorraine, yeah, he lived out in Vermilion, Brownhill. Anyway, he wrote me this week saying, I really need to find some book on Isaiah, I just don't get it. And so it's been 30 years he's been a member and he's still struggling with Isaiah, as many of us are. And one reason they do not understand is because they know not concerning the manner of the prophesying of the Jews. That's one of the things we'll talk about, is what the Jews are doing in their books of prophecy. Last week we talked about the 4 different kinds of prophets and the unacceptable prophets, all from Deuteronomy 18. You can go back and watch that for a good intro to what prophets are. Verse 3, I write unto my people that all those who shall receive hereafter these things which I write, that they might know the judgments of God, that they shall come upon all nations according to the word which he has spoken. Isaiah is going to speak not only to Israel and to Judah, but to all the surrounding nations. And that's unusual for a prophet to be speaking to, say, Egypt. And so that's Nephi emphasizing that. Hearken, O my people, which are of the house of Israel, give ear to my words. Because the words of Isaiah are not plain to you, nevertheless they are plain to those who are filled with the spirit of prophecy. Now there's a footnote that I would put into your scriptures at this point, and that is, the footnote is to go to Revelation chapter 19, verse 10, which of course this is John the Revelator, and he's speaking with an angel, and it says, and I fell at his feet. Now, the angel will say, will you get up? We're in the same elders' quorum. You know, don't be fallen before me. He says, I am thy fellow servant and of the brethren that have the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. So all those who are filled with the spirit of prophecy are those who have a testimony that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And that includes all the Old Testament prophets and the authors in the Book of Mormon, many of whom, of course, live before Jesus's mortal life. So that's important for us to remember, that those who are writing these Old Testament prophets knew about Christ. Now, Isaiah's name is an example of how we can see Jesus in the Old Testament. His name in Hebrew is Yashayahu. Yasha means Savior. Yah is Jehovah. So his name can be read, Jehovah saves, or it can be read, since Savior, Yasha in Greek is Jesus. You shall name him Jesus because he will save his people from their sins. So Isaiah's name is Jesus is Jehovah. Or Jehovah will come as Jesus. And I love that that's his name because more than any other Old Testament prophet, Isaiah is going to tell us events in the mortal life of Christ, from his birth all the way to his death and resurrection, on to his second coming. He really testifies of Christ. Now, verse 5. My soul delighteth in the words of Isaiah, for I came out of Jerusalem, and mine eyes have beheld the things of the Jews. I know the Jews understand the things of the prophets. There is no other people that understand the things which were spoken unto the Jews, like unto them, save it be they are taught after the manner of the things of the Jews. Now, it may be helpful to know that in Hebrew, the word things is debar. But that is also things. But it's also the Hebrew for words. And we're doing singular here. So if we reread that, putting a different word in where it says thing, because Hebrew words might mean 12 different things. One word can have 12 different translations into English. So let's reread that verse. My soul delighteth in the words of Isaiah, for I came out of Jerusalem. Mine eyes have beheld the words of the Jews. He has the brass plates. He has their scriptures. I know the Jews understand the words of the prophets. There is no other people that understand the words which were spoken unto the Jews, like unto them, save it be that they are taught after the manner of the words of the Jews. So the suggestion is, at least reading that one word in Hebrew, that looking at the Hebrew, looking at the original words that Isaiah wrote, will give you more information than trying to read it in translation. So that's part of what we are going to do here. Now, the next, verse 6, behold, I myself have dwelt at Jerusalem. Now, you notice he says at, not in. And in other places in the Book of Mormon, he'll talk about living near Jerusalem, and then he goes into Jerusalem to get the brass plates. Wherefore, I know concerning the regions round about. I have made mention unto my children concerning the judgments of God which have come to pass among the Jews. At the time that Nephi and his brothers and Lehi was prophesying to the city of Jerusalem, you're in trouble, they already were in trouble. When the book opens and Zedekiah is king, Zedekiah is a puppet king put in his position after the previous king got killed by the Babylonians, who are occupying the entire Holy Land. Nephi, Lehi, his brothers Laman and Lemuel, they're all living in like Vichy, France, occupied by the Nazis. So when those two brothers, Laman and Lemuel, say, all is well in Jerusalem, we're just fine, you want to look at them and say, are you idiots? It's like the Russians in Mariupol, right? So we can better understand why Sariah is just a little bit worried when Lehi sends her sons back to Jerusalem, occupied territory. That little piece of history, which is actually just one little piece, explains a whole lot about the situation as the Book of Mormon opens. Okay, verse 7. In the days that the prophecies of Isaiah shall be fulfilled, men shall know of a surety at the time when they come to pass. Wherefore they are of worth unto the children of men. I'll confine my words to my own people, for I know that they will be of great worth unto them in the last days. For in that day they shall understand them. For their good have I written them. We're living in the last days. Yes?
That's where you are.
That was 2 Nephi chapter 25, and we read from verse 1 down to verse 8. And in addition to Nephi encouraging us to read Isaiah and how to read Isaiah and what we might need to understand Isaiah, we also have the admonition from Jesus. Oh, looking in the wrong book there. That would be why. 3rd Nephi is not in the King James, where Jesus will say, okay, well, oh, that's the wrong bookmark. Now I say unto you that you should search these things, a commandment I give unto you, that you search these things diligently, for great are the words of Isaiah. He spake, this is 3rd Nephi 23, that was verse 1. Surely he spake as touching all things concerning my people, which are of the house of Israel. Therefore it must needs be that they also speak of the Gentiles. Because as Jesus looks at it, Gentiles are invited into the house of Israel. Everybody is ultimately going to have the opportunity to be house of Israel. So if he's pronouncing something happening to house of Israel, that's you. So those are the introductory words, and that means that we need to look at history. So we're going to do the Old Testament timeline, which we do every semester, right? You can watch this in detail. We're not going to actually finish it today, maybe. But I highly recommend memorizing this timeline so that you have a better idea of what's gone before and what's coming next in terms of history. So we begin with the creation, the flood, Tower of Babel, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, who gets sold into slavery in Egypt, and after him, all 12 tribes will end up in slavery in Egypt. God raises up a prophet, which is Moses, who takes them to Mount Sinai, where they receive the 10 Commandments and the temple. And then they will spend 40 years wandering in the wilderness until they come to the Jordan River, where Joshua, that's the same name as Jesus, Yeshua, Joshua, Jesus, same name. Joshua takes them across the Jordan River into the Promised Land. They attack the city of Jericho, and the walls fall down. They're then led at the death of Joshua by a series of judges. The last judge is Samuel, who will anoint the first two of the only 3 kings of the United Kingdom. That's Saul and David. Solomon will be anointed by Samuel's successor, Nathan. And at the death of Solomon, his son Rehoboam says, you thought my dad was going to be hard on you as a king. Wait till I get into office. And at that point, 10 of the 12 tribes revolt. And you have civil war. And they followed Jeroboam and established the nation of Israel in the north, with Ephraim as one of the major tribes. Those are the 10 tribes of Israel. Meanwhile, down in the south, in Judah, Rehoboam is the king, that's the son of Solomon, and 2 tribes follow him in Judah, and that's the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. In the northern kingdom, which is who Isaiah is talking to in the first half of the book, he is warning them that they have become so wicked because of the 18 kings in the northern kingdom, 0 are righteous. They've set up golden calves, they've built temples where they're doing inappropriate things, and Isaiah comes along and says, you are going down, Israel. And Assyria will be the axe in my hand that I use to chop down all of you wicked trees. One of the metaphors in Isaiah. And in 721, 20 years after Isaiah begins to write, the Assyrians attack and the northern kingdom comes to an end. Double bar, end of a musical piece. The 10 tribes are taken into captivity and lost. That's during Isaiah's lifetime. He's preaching, meanwhile, down in the southern kingdom of Judah at the time when a particular set of kings are serving. The one you remember the best will be Hezekiah. And of the 20 kings in the southern kingdom of Judah, you'll find that 8 are righteous, and Hezekiah is one of those. And he is advising the kings of Judah to not make the mistakes that Israel made, and to not worry about Israel coming down to attack them, which is what he says to Ahaz. Don't worry about Israel attacking you. Israel is going to be gone. The question is, will you go down with them? Because the Assyrians attacked Judah as well as Israel. What's going to happen there? That's the centerpiece of the book of Isaiah. I brought along a Revised Standard Version, which is another translation. And I like this one because it's similar to the King James, but just slightly modernized. But what they also will do is when something is spoken as poetry, they set it like you would see a poem. When something is history, they have it look like prose. This is chapter 36 in Isaiah, and you're done with some poetry for a while and you get history. And I think that visually, and then Isaiah speaks a poem, and then the history continues, and then Hezekiah speaks a poem. It's really helpful to see these modern, and then we get back to more history.
What book is that?
This is called the Revised Standard Version. There's also a new Revised Standard Version. And all of these are available free to read online at places like Bible Gateway, Bible Hub, all kinds of different places, because they're all out of copyright at this point. You can read different ones and decide which ones you like. There are many LDS people who like the NIV. One problem I have with the NIV, the New International Version, is that it's done by evangelical conservative Christians, and the reality is your theology is going to affect your translation. You don't want to get an American version of the Bible that says New American. That's Catholic. Knowing who has done the translation will help you to identify why there's some comment about the Trinity in the footnotes, right? It's important to know who did the translation that you're reading, who wrote the footnotes. And that's why it was so exciting when in 1980, 1964, we got the new Bible, the King James Version, same words, but with all those footnotes from the Quorum of the 12. That was helpful. And their committee. So, this is the time we're at. Hezekiah is the king in Jerusalem when the Assyrians are attacking. What's going to happen? That's those three or four central historical stories in Isaiah. The reality is, and we all know this, after Hezekiah comes his son Manasseh, who is really wicked and rules for 40 years. And we get down to the last kings who get replaced by the Babylonians who take Judah into captivity. And the reason I'm drawing the Star of David is because once you get this civil war, Israel and Judah, these people are now called Jews. Before this, they're Israelites. Well, that one goes back to before Israel, right? This is Hebrews. Abraham the Hebrew. His grandson, Jacob, is Israel. And these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and so they're known as Israelites. Knowing the correct terminology is helpful, okay? And knowing that it changes over time. So the Jews are taken into captivity in Babylon. Later, they will be allowed to go home under the rule of the Persians, particularly one of the Persian kings whose name is Cyrus. Cyrus is mentioned by name in the second half of Isaiah, as he talks about how even though Judah goes into captivity, yet God will bring them back. A remnant shall return. You'll come back, and Cyrus will be like a Messiah to you. They also will be released by Darius, another king of the Persians. Now, I love how kind God was to us here in America, or those in English, because it's A, B, C, D. We can memorize this, okay? And that's where I'm going to leave it, just so that you don't get confused by the ending. So these collections of prophecies are in the first half of the book to all of Israel, including the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, who are part of the northern kingdom. I mention those in particular because that's probably what everyone in this room comes through one of those tribes, usually in the church. First ones to go into captivity, okay? But they were the leaders of that nation. So when he speaks about Ephraim, that's us. Now, that includes Ephraim and Manasseh, is Lehi, who's from Manasseh, and Ishmael, who is from Ephraim. So the Book of Mormon is written by people not from Judah, but from Israel, who I believe, when Hezekiah holds the great Passover, he invites all of Israel to come to the temple for Passover. And most of the people up in Israel say, forget it, that's a long way, we're not going, and besides, we got our own temples up here at Dan. We're just fine. But some do go. And I personally believe that's when Ishmael and Lehi's families moved from the northern kingdom and thus were not taken into captivity. They're living down at Jerusalem, and they got to have some other kind of job other than farming because they don't have any land. The land that they inherited is up north. And that may be why they become traders running camel caravans, which is what Nibley teaches. So understanding this timeline also helps us understand the Book of Mormon and why Nephi loves Isaiah. It saved his family. Their they're free because they listened to the prophet Isaiah and got out of the wicked northern kingdom. Okay. Yes, but you should also know that this is available as a handout on the Stake website. I think it's lesson number 2. So that's there. And it explains each symbol and tells what it is. Very helpful handout. Okay, so I hope that that little bit helps you understand what Nephi meant when he said to really understand Isaiah, you need to know something of history. You need to know about the politics. You need to know who is ruling, who are the enemies, what's going on, what wars have been fought, what haven't. And so that's going to set us up to understand Isaiah better. Now, I'm going to quote from a website that doesn't exist anymore. Once I figure out how to use the Wayback Machine, which I haven't yet, that's a site that archives all old websites. Everything you ever found on a website is on that Wayback Machine. It's amazing. I haven't figured out how to use it yet, though. So I'll talk to my kids. This is from Victor Ludlow's BYU page when he was a teacher of religion at BYU. He taught Old Testament, and particularly every year he did a class on Isaiah. And so he had a website with all of his helps for understanding Isaiah. Now he's the author of a book entitled Isaiah, Prophet, Poet, Seer. Okay, one of those, and maybe in that order, prophet, seer, poet, something like that. You'll find it, Victor Ludlow. And he goes through a verse-by-verse commentary, which was one of the first where we had someone who could read Hebrew help us better understand what Isaiah is writing, but also a member of the church who could link it to things in the Book of Mormon, things in the Doctrine and Covenants, things that Latter-day Prophets have said. So that book was quite amazing when it was first printed. Since then, we've had a couple of others. I'll bring others in this week. One by Donald Perry, who lives in... Yeah.
Perry and Perry, is that one good?
There's one by Perry called Understanding Isaiah.
Right, it's by the two brothers.
And it's excellent. It takes a different approach, which is why they wrote it. Perry also did a book that I highly recommend. I'll bring in next week so you can see it. It's called Visualizing Isaiah. And it's extremely helpful, particularly for children, teenagers, beginners, and scholars, because it is a book of photographs of the places and things Isaiah is talking about, so that you can see what that kind of tree looks like. And what do the hills around Shechem look like? And what is the wilderness of Judah? How does that look? And anyway, it's a marvelous book because it helps you to visualize Isaiah. And he is going to use so many metaphors that if you don't know what he is comparing things to, you'll miss the point. Right? You can only really understand poetry if you understand what the poet is comparing to, the metaphors or similes. So, we talked about having two portions. It's chapters 1 to 35, then you have 36 to 39, and then you have 40 to 66. This is the historical portion in the middle. This is speaking to Israel, and Judah, saying to Judah, don't be stupid and do what Israel has done. This section is talking to Judah, both when they're free and captive, promising you'll return. So this one's kind of dark. There's a lot of condemnation going on at the beginning of the book of Isaiah. The second half is much more light and positive. Let me just pull out a few words that I wanted to put on here. And this is a metaphor that Isaiah is going to use a lot. Okay, I can't draw, but you get the idea. This is a two-edged sword. Okay, if I could draw straight lines. This is a two-edged sword. That's out of Isaiah. And on one side, you're going to have the curses coming upon the people when they're wicked. On the other side, you'll find the blessings when they're righteous. Now, we're used to hearing this language in the Book of Mormon, where it says, when you are righteous, you will prosper in the land. When you are wicked, you will be cut off. And this two-edged sword is going to do the cutting. Often it is war or people coming with a sword to get you that will cut you off from the presence of God. And that's certainly what happened to the northern kingdom of Israel, okay, when the Assyrians attacked. But I wanted to read to you Isaiah's version of that. That's in Isaiah chapter 1, verse, just a sec, I'll find it here. Chapter 1, and it's verses 19 and 20. See if this sounds like Nephi. If you are willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you will be devoured with the sword. For the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. It's interesting that the sword devours you. That's actually eat in Hebrew, ochel. And you're going to see swords and mouth paralleled through all of Isaiah. The two-edged sword comes out of his mouth, of God's mouth, right? We'll read a lot of those verses. But I wanted to give you an idea of what we're going to look for on the curse side. As Isaiah chapter 1 opens, it's a court scene where God is calling heaven and earth to witness to the iniquity that's going on in Israel. So he's going to justify his actions by saying, you broke the law. You are going down. And not just Israel is in trouble, but all the other surrounding nations. These are called the nations oracles, where God steps in, and this is really odd in his day, because these nations think they have a different God. The concept of having one God over all the earth, who is the God of all people, well, that's what Abraham taught, but that is very much a Jewish idea, even after, well, down into the modern age, because there are, the Romans had how many gods? And that was at the time of Jesus. The Greeks had numerous gods. Obviously, the Mesopotamians, the Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians all worship different gods. And yet Isaiah says, God is the God over all of them, and his laws apply, and you will be blessed or cursed depending on how you react to God's laws, even if you're not one of his covenant people. It's going to affect you. Now, in Ludlow's Isaiah class, he was an interesting teacher, and we encourage all of our kids who attended BYU to take classes from two teachers. One was Victor Ludlow, the other was Stephen Robinson, who were the best religion professors in their day when our kids were there. So my youngest two kids, Steve and Heather, both took Ludlow, and at that time he was assigning a project for his final exam. You were to take something out of Isaiah and do what Isaiah did and do a metaphor or make something out of it. It could be a play, it could be a piece of artwork. This is what our son Steve did. Now, he was an Arabic major and had been to Egypt to study Arabic with BYU Study Abroad. And he made this plaque, which I hope you can see is a temple. And it says here, the house of the Lord. And then it has the same verse from Isaiah in Hebrew, in Arabic, and in English. And it says, in that day, which McConkie will tell us in the latter days, in that day there shall be an altar to the Lord. Now, you need to know this word. When it says Lord with all capital letters, that's translating the name of God, Yud-He-Vav-He, which is Jehovah. So every time you see this L-O-R-D, you can read Jehovah. The Hebrew is actually Yahweh, and believe me, Jews would not write it on the board because they're not allowed to erase the name of God. Anything with the name of God written on it, they can't throw away. So they bury it. And in the Salt Lake Cemetery, right next to it is the Jewish cemetery, and that's where the synagogue buries their old books. Can you imagine what happened to old books buried in Egypt? In those dry sands? They're preserved. And the Cairo Geniza, which is synagogue, cemetery in Cairo, is how we got some of the oldest books. Because burying them saved them. Do you see kind of a parallel with the Book of Mormon being buried? Okay, I think that's interesting. So this says there will be an altar to Jehovah in the land of Egypt. Well, at the time Isaiah is speaking, nobody in Egypt really believes in Jehovah. They believe in Amun-Ra or Isis or Osiris or some Egyptian god. But if you have an altar, then you have a temple. So this is a prophecy, and let me finish it. In that day there shall be an altar to the Lord in the midst of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof to the Lord, to Jehovah. Pillars and altar are the things you see out in the courtyard of King Solomon's temple, of Herod's temple. It's saying there will be a temple in Egypt. Now, when I was a kid, boy, was that a far-fetched idea. It's looking a lot more likely now as we build hundreds of temples. I have no idea how many members we have in Egypt. But it's a real possibility that some conference we're going to have president of the church stand up and say, we're building a temple in Egypt. I mean, we now have a stake center in, not Doha, Dubai, in Dubai. And a temple in Rome. I mean, what are the odds, right?
Do you have a reference for the scripture reference for the English version of your
Yes, that's Isaiah chapter 19, verse 19. Yeah. So, the nation's oracles, and then it continues on down, but you get a lot of scattering on this side. And you end up with people in captivity, and they have lost their land. So, if you look at the second half of the book, what are some of the things you're going to see more of? Instead of an accusation, you're going to see encouragement. You're going to see gathering. Freedom from slavery, and a new land, or restoration of the old land, a new earth. The book ends with a new earth and a new heaven, as it describes the millennial day. So these opposites are throughout all of Isaiah, as he shows one side and then the other. And it's not that everything in the first half is negative and everything in the second half is positive, but this is a general way that people will look at this book. Yes?
So then, when they're talking about encouragement, is that encouragement more to stick with, do what I say, do what I tell you and teach you from the Lord, and in heaven, you'll have freedom from slavery in the new earth and heaven, or is he?
No, he's talking about,
Because they didn't have a lot of freedom.
well, it was 70 years in Babylon,
Right,
and then a group came back and rebuilt the temple.
right, but still they were worried about the Romans during that.
Sure. And many would say, well, what did you do? The first time when you arrive home, what did you do? You started a civil war against the Samaritans. Do you think that was God's hope? That you would then war against the people of the land? They begin naming all of the men who become king with Greek names, as Greek culture moves in. So you can see it isn't very long after Ezra and Nehemiah arrive that wickedness is back. And it's going to repeat again. And the Jews will go into captivity again. Exactly. And so we'll get to the 10 keys to understanding Isaiah, which is a document that I suggested last week. No, that's wrong. That I sent out in an email a couple of weeks ago when we started studying Isaiah in Come Follow Me. If you are not on my email list for this class, let me find something here that we can pass around this board. If you're not on the email list for this class, please write your email on here, and I will resend the 10 keys to understanding Isaiah from Bruce R. McConkie that is very helpful for learning ways to better understand Isaiah. Now, okay. Okay, I want to give you a sense of how this image of the sword permeates all of Isaiah. And in fact, the image of the sword as a tool for God to use begins in the Garden of Eden, where you have the cherubim with the flaming sword, and Here's the Hebrew. I wanted you to see that that is actually a play on words. This is cherubim. Now, the English always adds an S at the end of cherubim and seraphim. Well, they're already plural. The I am is the masculine plural ending, so you don't need to add an S. An S is like saying geeses, right? Deers. It's just wrong. So, ignore it. So cherubim is spelled with these letters, reading from right to left. And so it's cherubim. And sword is written with similar words, cherub. Sword actually starts with the CH. This does not. That's what's so confusing about trying to transliterate or go say a Hebrew word in English, is not everybody uses the same English letters to replace the Hebrew letters. 3 in particular are really confusing. This one should be a K. This one should be a CH. And this one should be a Q. All of them will be interposed on each other. And they actually sound a lot alike. So when you hear somebody who's kind of like Neil A. Maxwell, you remember his wonderful wordplay, right? Isaiah does a lot of that, but so do other writers. And I think that that was what was going on in having cherubim with a cherub, okay? Just makes some sense. The two-edged sword, which is actually something we know well from the book of the New Testament, from Hebrews and from the book of Revelation, that two-edged sword is mentioned in the Psalms. So it's an old phrase. And in Psalm 149, which is the second to last psalm, it says, I'll find it here. Let the high praises of God be in their mouth, and a two-edged sword in their hand. This is talking about people at the temple. What would you be doing with a sword at the temple? Well, remember, it's a temple that is built. This is the Old Testament temple. And right here in the courtyard is the altar of sacrifice. And this is where you would go to obtain forgiveness of sins by offering a firstborn male lamb, goat, or bull. This altar of sacrifice is where you obtain forgiveness, where an atonement is made for you, Leviticus chapter 1, talking about this ceremony of how to obtain forgiveness. And so you cut the throat of the animal, and then you cut it in pieces. And that metaphor of killing an animal and cutting it in pieces is actually how people made covenants in the Old Testament world and in all the countries surrounding them. When you read Assyrian or Sumerian or Babylonian, they're killing different animals. Some it's a mule, some it's a deer, somebody else, a pig is holy to them. Down in Egypt, at the time of the Exodus, the most honored animal was the lamb. And they didn't sacrifice lambs. They were holy to their God, kind of like holy cows in India. So just imagine how the Egyptians felt as the Israelites are slaughtering lambs and putting the blood over their door. That would have been offensive religiously. But they're not the only ones who get the lamb, okay? So this is how covenants are made. And every time you see they made a covenant, I'm going to take that S off because there is only one covenant. It is the new and everlasting covenant. You access it in different ways, but they are all appendages to the new and everlasting covenant. And where it says made, the Hebrew is karat or cut. So people would cut a covenant with that sword. If you keep the covenant, you receive the blessings, which are one edge of the sword. If you don't keep the covenant, then you get the curses that will come upon you for not keeping your covenant. Okay, here's some verses where Isaiah is going to use this idea of a sword. Now remember, a sword is made out of a rod of iron, right? You take a rod of iron to a blacksmith, and they hammer it and temper it and change the iron into steel, and you end up with a Damascus sword. Beautiful. Isaiah will talk about that process using different implements. He will say, this is chapter 2, verse 4. He will judge among the nations. See, not just Israel and Judah, all nations God judges, and rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. This is talking about in that day, at the time that the Messiah comes. Now, if you go to the UN, there's this beautiful statue. Ironically, it's made in Russia. And it shows a Russian blacksmith holding onto a sword that he is beating into a plowshare. Don't we wish? But other prophets are going to reverse this, and we honestly don't know which version was written first. They're going to say they will beat their plowshares into swords and their pruning hooks into spears. Can you see that wonderful reversal? Because that rod of iron is expensive. It may be the single most expensive thing you own is that piece of iron. We forget to notice what ages that biblical history is happening in. And most of it is long before the Iron Age. It's the Bronze Age. And in fact, in Israel, at the time of the first king, King Saul, there were only 2 iron swords in all of Israel. Saul had one, and his son Jonathan had the other. Everyone else was using bronze or a sword kind of like you might see if you go to Mexico, where they have obsidian blades, or where they have a wooden blade with obsidian set in the edge of it, like teeth, which is a really good metaphor because that's what two-edged means. It means having 2 mouths or sets of teeth or a cutting edge. And this is the Hebrew for it. There's kerub, that's sword, pepeot. Pe is the Hebrew word for mouth. So it's a sword with teeth on each side. It's got 2 mouths, and the 2-edged sword comes out of God's mouth. English works really well here. I love how this works, because you have swords. You have a sword which represents God's words. You just need to move the S to the end. So that sword is the word. It's the iron rod. And that metaphor is used over and over and over. For example, Isaiah 27:1. In that day, the Lord with his sore, great, and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent. He will slay the dragon that is in the sea. What's a Leviathan? And what is this serpent thing and dragon? It really isn't until you get to the book of Revelation where you see the dragon with all the different crowns attacking Mary and her son that you go, oh, it's Satan and his kingdom. But it's a very, very old metaphor that shows up way, way early. That was Isaiah 27:1. Here's Isaiah 31:8. The Assyrian shall fall by the sword. Now I'm going to use them as an axe to afflict Israel, but quite literally, the king of Assyria shall fall by the sword, not of a mighty man, and the sword not of a mean man shall devour or eat him. He shall flee from the sword. And in fact, king of Assyria goes home and is killed by his own sons with a sword. Isaiah 34:5. My sword is bathed in heaven. It shall come down upon Idumea and upon the people of my curse to judge them. You see why I draw that picture and have blessings and curses on the sword of the Lord is filled with blood. Well, that's true in the temple where they're offering sacrifices. But if you don't keep that covenant, then it's going to be true for you out in the world where he will let your enemy come and attack you. He will no longer fight for you as he did at Jericho, right? It was God who fought that battle. There's going to be a slaughter. Isaiah 41:15. Behold, I will make thee a new sharp threshing instrument having teeth. Thou shalt thresh the mountains and beat them small. Thou shalt make hills as chaff. Now, normally we think of a mountain as the temple. But we're kind of forgetting that everybody else uses that metaphor as well. In Greek mythology, where does Zeus live? On top of Mount Olympus. In the Mesopotamian area, when they wanted to build a temple, they made an artificial mountain, and God lives at the top of it, which is exactly the same as you see when you go down to Mesoamerica, into the Yucatan, and find all of those artificial mountains with the temple right on the top. So you have to be able to distinguish between when is Isaiah talking about mountains as God's house, and when is he using mountain and hill as describing other nations? Good luck. 49 verse 2. This is one of the best. This is speaking of, Isaiah is speaking of God's servant. He hath made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand hath he hid me, and made me a polished shaft. In his quiver he hath hid me. So this rod could also be made into arrows. And I have actually seen iron arrowheads that were found in Jerusalem that are from Babylon attacking the city of Jerusalem. So, yeah. He said unto me, Thou art my servant, O Israel, in whom I will be glorified. 51:19, verse 51:19, Isaiah. Two things shall come unto thee, and who will be sorry for thee? Desolation and destruction, and famine and the sword. So he's got two things and then two things more. And he's actually echoing the words of God in the law in Leviticus, where he says, if you keep the covenant, you'll prosper in the land. I will give you rain. If you don't keep the covenant, I will cause you to become desolate. That's the word. Desolate and desolation is broken covenant. And I'll do it one of three ways: famine, pestilence, or the sword.
What was that Leviticus?
It's in chapter 26. But you'll hear that over and over and over in Jeremiah. So watch for that. He is saying you've broken your covenant and you're going to reap the effects. When you get to the book of Revelation and you have the four horsemen, it's death, famine, pestilence, and war. They are coming, and horses are always weapons of war. They pull chariots. You can't afford a horse to pull a wagon in the Old Testament. And you have to go to Egypt to buy those horses out of Arabia and out of Egypt. So when Solomon gets lots and lots and lots of horses, which he puts in his stables up at a mountain called Megiddo, that becomes, he puts them there because just north of that mountain is the Jezreel Valley, which is where Mount Carmel is, which means Garden of God. And it is the most fertile place in Galilee. So he's going to protect it. The great war at the end of time starts there at Har, that's mountain, Megiddo, which is Armageddon. And that's why the horses are there, to fight that war. That's the valley where Deborah and Barak, I think it's Barak, fight against their enemy, Sisera, and his chariots get bogged down in the mud. God fights the battle for him by just sending a flood.
Are you saying that's where the last war?
Yeah, Armageddon.
Will be fought?
That's the metaphor.
Okay.
Okay? Is it literal that it will start there? I don't know. Every time that I see Gaza dropping rockets on Israel and Israel retaliates, is it going to escalate? Just like right now we're worried about, is this war in Ukraine going to escalate? What kinds of weapons are they going to start using? Who's going to get dragged into this? And it's always a local war that then becomes a world war.
But there really isn't anything on Megiddo now. It's basically just a tourist site.
Right. But can you see, this is a lot like we'll see in Isaiah chapter 6, which we were supposed to get to today. We won't, but that's okay. We'll do it next week. Where a part of something stands for the whole. Isaiah will say, I am a man of unclean lips. Well, he's been eating chocolate? No, he's saying, I am a sinful person. But his unclean lips are a part that represent the whole. That's called synecdoche. Yeah, I'll spell it for you next week. It's a Greek word that means to take a part to represent the whole. So will the great last war begin in the Middle East? That's possible. They'll certainly get dragged into it. Yeah, so many verses about an iron rod, and the word rod is usually translated, the Hebrew word is usually translated as tribe. Every time it talks about the 12 tribes, it's talking about 12 rods or 12 ensigns that are standards for each of the tribes. So when they're wondering who's going to be the priests at the temple, God says, bring a rod from each tribe. and plant it in the ground here, stick it in the ground, and tomorrow we'll see who God wants to be his priests. And tomorrow, the rod, the dead stick, used by Aaron, representing the tribe of Levi, has rooted, branched, grown leaves, flowers, and borne fruit, which are almonds. It's pretty obvious who God wants to put in charge of the house that has a tree in it, right? See the tree? That has a trunk and branches and leaves and almond-shaped blossoms at the ends. And maybe even burns almond oil. You could, okay? So when you're reading through, and Isaiah says, "There shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow from his roots." What do we know from that statement? Who's Jesse? My father-in-law. That's Randy's dad. It's a form of the word meaning to exist, to be, one who is. That's what Jesse means. But that's also what Jehovah means, right? I am that I am. So it's similar to the name of Jehovah. And he is the father of David, who is the king. But if we see this branch growing, what's a branch related to? Priesthood. So is he going to come as a king, or is he going to come as a priest? And the word branch, Netzer, is the name of a town called Nazareth, where the branch is born. And he's a rod. Now, how is that rod going to be used? Will it be an iron rod which takes you to the tree of life? Or is it going to be a sword that cuts you off because you have been wicked and you don't get access to the tree of life anymore? There's the angel, the cherubim, standing there with the sword to stop you from getting to the tree. That's the image when in chapter 5 of 2nd Nephi, he says, we built a temple up in Nephi, and the Lamanites were cut off from the presence of the Lord. They can't come in the temple. It's as if there's an angel there with a sword to keep them out. Now, what's really keeping them out is their own disinterest and their own wickedness. They couldn't pass the recommend. And that's what keeps people out of temples even to our day. It's not that God doesn't want them in there, it's that they have no interest in going and are not keeping the covenant that they make in that house. So don't put them under commitment. Psalm 2, verse 9, speaking of the king, the Son of God, this was probably a song written for the coronation of David. David is told that he shall break them, the nations around him, with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. My friend who wrote to me and said, how can I better study Isaiah? I said, listen to Handel's Messiah. Because half of Handel's Messiah is taken from Isaiah, if not more. I have trouble reading some verses. I have to sing them, right? O Assyrian, this is Isaiah chapter 10, verse 5. The rod of mine anger, the staff in their hand is mine indignation. Now, when you get to the New Testament, I just wanted to let you hear how this same metaphor is still used 1,000 years after David wrote the Psalms. In 2 Thessalonians, then shall the wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume or eat with the spirit of his mouth. Now, how's he going to consume him? He was consumed with the sword, right? We already read that. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12. For the word of God is quick and powerful, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit, joint and marrow, and is the discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. Can you see that the covenant that you cut with that sword, whether you do or don't choose to make that covenant, depends on your own thoughts and desires and intents. And so it's going to, the covenant, God's word, his commandments to us, will either make a covenant, cut a covenant with you, in which you'll be blessed, but if you don't keep those commandments, then you don't get those blessings, and that's the curse. I hesitate to say that God is going to curse you. It's really that God isn't allowed to bless you because you're not doing the things that bring blessings into your life. You don't have peace because you have war. Revelation chapter 1, verse 16. He, this is speaking of the resurrected Christ, in his right hand held 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp two-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shining in its strength. This blessing and cursing was the basis for my daughter Heather's project for Ludlow's Isaiah class. She was also taking a class in bookbinding. So she said, hey, I can do one project and pass off 2 assignments. Smart kids go to BYU, you know, I mean, it's, yeah. So what she decided to do is to make a book that you could read either from the right to the left, as you do in Hebrew, and she chose pictures to represent verses from Isaiah. This is who is the stem of Jesse. There's a piece of wood. He that putteth his trust in me shall inherit my holy mountain. Like that. She took a topographical map and wrinkled it so it actually has texture and hills. I will lay in Zion a precious cornerstone. So we have a picture of marble, a sure foundation. And then we have a space where it's blank, and now we're reading it from the other direction. And we will find, the stone again. He will be a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to Israel. This mountain, in this mountain shall the hand of the Lord rest, and Moab will be trodden down under the mountain. The rocks will fall upon you. The staff, again a rod, in their hand is mine indignation. You see what she's done through this whole book? She has an image of blessing, and using the exact same image showing how it is a curse. And all of these are from Isaiah. Really fascinating. Ludlow actually got up in class and said, this is what I want. This is a good project. Understanding that when you hit a metaphor or simile, you have to stop and say, is this a positive image? Is it a negative image? Is this a blessing he's giving? Is this a curse? And unfortunately, we're not very good at that. One example is when we hear the phrase, his hand is stretched out still. Virtually everyone that I have heard use that verse uses it in a positive way. And they have a picture of Christ reaching out. they haven't read the first half of the verse, which says, "Yet for all this punishment that I've already given you, my hand is stretched out still, and it has a sword in it, and you're going to be cut off because you're still sinning." So read the surrounding verses so that you can read a metaphor in the context that Isaiah is using it, so you'll know whether it's a blessing or a curse, because it's going to be the same object. The cornerstone becomes the corner of the temple that everything is based on, right? But that is a stone of stumbling. Let me show you what stone is. This is the Hebrew, that's E-B-N, so that's eben. That's stone. But this is what I notice. Eb, these two letters, let me do this in red, you'll see it better. These two letters are the word Ab, or father, the first half of the name Abraham. These two letters are the word Ben, which is son, Ben-Hur, right? Judah Ben-Hur. So what is the rock? The Father and the Son, or that the Father has a son, and that's something the Jews continue to trip over. That's the stone of stumbling. That inability to recognize that God sent his Son into the world. Not to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved. That's why he was named Jesus, which means Savior. It should be really obvious at his birth what his mission is, right? It's not like a huge secret. Now, Elder Orson F. Whitney talks about these metaphors or symbols, and Isaiah is just packed with them. This is Orson F. Whitney, who used to be in the Quorum of the 12. "I have long held the view that the universe is built upon symbols, whereby one thing bespeaks another, the lesser testifying of the greater, lifting our thoughts from man to God, from earth to heaven, from time to eternity. God teaches with symbols. It is his favorite method of teaching." And this is an article from the Deseret News that I enjoyed. It's talking about what are some of the symbols on the Salt Lake Temple and how do we interpret those symbols. And it is quite literally the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the host of heaven, which Isaiah will say includes the sun and the moon and the stars. Now, that's interesting because the word host, which is, okay, it's going to come up next week in chapter 6, where the host of heaven is mentioned. Host is this word, Sabaoth. If you've ever heard of the Lord Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts is his name, that word means army. So when a host of heaven comes to sing, it's a military choir, because their commander-in-chief has just been born. And the war, they're going to win, because he always wins. And then he dies on the cross, and everybody's confused. And on the third day, he rose again and said, look, the war here, fighting the Romans, it's irrelevant. The real war is in your heart. That's what really matters, is the thoughts and intents of your heart. As you go inside this building, it's also packed with symbolism. And I personally believe that using different tools to read and understand Isaiah will help us better understand our temple experience. Isaiah was probably a temple priest. We know that Jeremiah was of the priestly family, born in Anatoth. We know that Ezekiel is a priest living in Babylon in the captivity. We do not know most of the other prophets, if they were priests, and some will say, I am not a priest, I'm a shepherd, right? I didn't come out of Jerusalem, and I didn't study for this. I'm just sent to bring you this message. Okay, which is hard for us to recognize, that you might have a prophet who is not a priest. Okay, now, I personally believe they held Melchizedek priesthood, but they weren't able to use that in the temples which were Aaronic, Levitical temples. Okay? So, although we know that Moses had Melchizedek priesthood, given to him by Jethro, D&C 84, yet it's his brother Aaron who gets anointed to be the high priest. He's an older brother. And that seems to matter in terms of the birthright. So you have Moses as the prophet and Aaron as the priest. Now, as this whole idea of things on earth teaching us about the heavens, and things in the heavens teaching us about the earth, and things that are physical teaching us about spiritual things, that's called typology, where one thing represents another. Types and shadows. 2 Nephi chapter 11, verse 4. My soul delighteth. This is just after he said, I have seen God. This is Nephi has seen God, my Redeemer. My brother Jacob has seen, and so has Isaiah. We're the three witnesses. This is right after Lehi dies. Before that, Lehi was one of the three witnesses. Behold, my soul delighteth in proving unto my people the truth of the coming of Christ. For this end hath the law of Moses been given, and all things which have been given of God from the beginning of the world unto man are the typifying of him. We don't necessarily believe that. We don't look at everything and say, how can that teach me of Christ? How can snow teach me about Christ? How does a tree teach about Christ? How does the firstborn lamb teach me about Christ? What about an egg? What about candy canes? You know, at Christmas, we often will do all these different symbols, and each one teaches us something about Christ. That's because through all of the Middle Ages, when people were illiterate, the Catholic Church and the Christian Church on down since then have used these metaphors and images in teaching people. You go to any cathedral that has stained glass windows and they're going to use pictures. And to know who the guy is in the picture, you have to know his story. If he's holding a set of keys, who is he? Ask Peter, right? And each of the different apostles has something that identifies who he is. Each of the four gospel writers have a symbol. The symbols are the four faces of the cherubim in Ezekiel. Eagle, lion, man, and bull. And the idea is that the Gospels carry Jesus into our day. But when you walk into some Catholic church and there's an eagle and a lion and a bull and an angel carved on the door, you don't stop and say, oh, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You need to be taught how to interpret symbols. And the trick with Isaiah is to figure out what he meant by it. Not necessarily what Latter-day Saints mean by that word, or what the Catholic Church meant by that symbol, but what did Isaiah mean? And he's 750 BC. It's a different world. And reading him in context helps. Now, those of you who've been in my class previously will recognize a couple of themes that are going to come up in Isaiah and this two-edged sword. Isaiah is going to talk about two kings, two sons. Remember the story of the two sons? A man had two sons. Where does that go back to? Well, all the way back to Jesus and Lucifer, right? So we have sons on both sides. And they have followers and live in two cities. Remember the two cities? We have two cities of Enoch in Genesis. The city of Enoch built by Cain's son, and the city of Enoch built by Enoch. And we kind of, what do you mean there's two cities of Enoch? It's meant to be confusing, folks. You need to look at what those cities are based on, what's going on in those cities. And the cities actually get named in Isaiah, and we're going to see Babylon and Zion as these two cities. Now, sometimes they're considered to be two sisters. And the northern kingdom of Israel will be considered the older sister, and the southern kingdom of Judah is the younger sister. We're not talking about women, okay? So when Isaiah is criticizing the women in Israel for all of their stuff, he's not talking to the women, he's talking to the entire nation and their materialism and concern about appearances, like anybody really cares what your clothes look like. Okay? We'll also see two different paths, two ways. There's the broad way and the straight and narrow way. And those ways lead to two different houses. You have a great and spacious building, and you have the temple. So Jerusalem is actually going to be described on both sides as the faithful city, the virgin daughter who is married to God, and on the other hand, she is divorced, she is a harlot, and it's talking about the same place. But it's not talking about women, it's talking about something bigger. Typology is not easy, but then understanding the gospel takes effort. Even though we teach it simply, when you go to the scriptures, it's a little harder. And putting in the time to interpret in Isaiah's context what he was saying is what will allow us to then apply those scriptures to ourselves, which is what Nephi recommends. And I leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.